Well, thank you all. I think I can't imagine there won't be lots of questions, but I wanted to start by throwing out actually what I think might be something of a hardball. But apropos of the presentation that Eric gave before the panel, the question that I have is, as we've begun to develop these extraordinary methods, both for discovery in population health science and for population health management, the fear has emerged from many quarters that these fantastic technologies will be greatly used to embellish the health and welfare of the richer part of our population, and will thereby leave a larger portion of our population behind, increasing disparities, although that's obviously not the ambition. I wonder if each of you just may want to comment on the relationship of that issue to the work that you're currently doing, and how you think this work could actually be turned to address the disparities issue, which is one of the principal goals of population health science. I'm going to start with Manny.
Yeah, definitely. So, one of the reasons why I came to Stanford was because of Carlos and his push for thinking about genetics in underrepresented minorities. And that is one of the, as this data become useful in the context of public health, and in addition to that, the maintenance of patients, for me as a member of that group, it's quite important to think about how we can leverage these data sets to also benefit those members of that society as well.
Great.
Yeah, I don't know if you noticed, but I had one of the bullets of like what are the barriers to implementing precision medicine. One of them was the possibility that this could increase the disparities. And then the bullet over on the color platform side, I didn't have time to call it out, but we in our self-insured employer channel, with kind of this easy access, affordable, supportive system to access this information, we are getting 44% non-white participation. And that's our first measurement on it. So, we kind of stood it up, collected data, went and took a look. And so now we actually even have the opportunity to go back and optimize to tune that more. So I think we're seeing a signal that if you design the right platform, that you actually can reach a more diverse population. And then we have, you go out of your way to kind of make projects and accessibility partnerships with institutions in underserved areas, partnerships in Africa, and things like that to improve both the database diversity and the diversity of the participants.
Great, thank you. So Dan, tell me a little bit about how you envision some of the algorithms and tools that are being developed at Clalit and in systems like it that may actually be used to address disparities rather than exacerbate them.
Yes, I think one key observation is that we simply don't have representative EMR data, so it's very hard to know when you work with EMR data what disparity are you looking at. It's also true that in the US, insurance data is quite fragmented, but Medicaid comes to mind as a way to really look at large populations that are at need, and whatever public policy or it could be prediction, which is just documenting disparities. I think starting with claims makes a lot of sense. And of course, I always want to put the caveat that to push for some of the more futuristic changes, we might need EMR data. So it's very good to try and collect them in a systematic way and perhaps more representative way. But it's a long road until we have this. And in the meantime, I think claims data are a very valuable resource to study population health.
Great. So Joe, I'm going to throw the same question at you. I think Dan sort of teed you up with one thing that you could talk about, and I know many of us in the room are extremely interested in the Medicaid story, but tell us a little bit about how Nuna is thinking about, in developing its algorithms and developing its transparent systems, thinking about those who are least likely to benefit in general from these kinds of advances.
Definitely. Dan sort of stole my thunder a little bit because I was going to give a similar answer. I think that one of the biggest opportunities to apply the tool that I described of making targeted matches of members to sort of the right primary care physicians for them is actually in the Medicaid market. In the Medicaid market, there are lots and lots of members who fail to choose a primary care physician at all, and so there's a big opportunity to sort of replace the very rudimentary default assignment algorithms that plans use today. to get patients in the offices of primary care physicians that are much more likely to meet their health needs.
Great. And Susie, in the design and implementation of Baseline and other of the fabulous strategic initiatives that your department has undertaken, tell me how you're thinking about the disparities question as you move forward.
I mean, we're making sure that we're really working hard to include the diversity of the population so that we have representative information within the study about the overall population, so that we have information that will apply to everyone, not just an elite set of individuals. So I think that ultimately it's going to take time to get this learning, but the goals are that if you're going to start so much earlier to keep people healthy, there's going to be a lot of incentives economically to really do that. And so we hope that that learning can really be applied to everyone once we kind of have all this data over time.
And are you able to utilize some of the tools that Eric spoke of earlier that are being used in all of us, and I know in the Million Vets Project, to bring into Baseline enough of a representative population that such things won't be overlooked?
We're working hard to do it. I mean, we've got thousands of people already in our database because there's so much interest and people are really excited about their data, but it doesn't mean it's thousands of the right people. So we're working hard we're going out to the Cinco de Mayo festivals, and we're going out and reaching out to people via social media and really trying to engage with people in all different areas. And we really do need to get more sites throughout the United States in order to be representative, and that's a goal. So I think that we are making sure that we're bringing in people that are not just the next in line. We're making sure that we're really open and bringing in people that are going to fill all these different buckets so we truly are representative.
Great, thank you. Well, there's lots more fun that I could have with our panel, but I think I can see out there in the lights that there are some questions from the audience, so we'll start over.
Hi,
over here.
my name is Rama. I'm from Genentech. I'm afraid I have questions for 4 of you here. Susie, I'll start with you. Quickly, who pays for this 4 years of tracking of all the patients? Because it seems like a very, very extensive data collection over many tests and imaging and stuff like that. So who pays for that, and how are you able to sustain that level of intense testing?
So Verily, the Life Sciences Division of Google is paying for the study. They're the sponsor, and it's an incredibly expensive study to run, as you can imagine, because the extensive numbers of tests and assessments and this data collection. So it's an investment on their part to do this. And, much like Eric said, it's like this technology and healthcare merger means that things can't be as clean and precise as they maybe have been in medicine in the past. There's this very dynamic nature to the study. So as we're going through and we're learning, we're changing and iterating to optimize what's being returned. So that's the best way to kind of make sure that we are using the money in the best way possible as we go forward.
Mm-hmm. I have a question for Joe. So you said you have an app or an algorithm that helps patients match up with doctors. There is no thing like a Yelp that has reviews for restaurants. There is no such thing as rating doctors. And often, if you ask me, I would just go by, as you said, where did the doctor study? And most importantly, how much experience does he have? I don't have a place to go check what have other patients said about him. So I'm afraid there is very minimum data for you to do this kind of matching in a very efficient way. And also, patients are seldom aware of the cost of how much this doctor is going to charge me. Because if I go to a doctor, I'm not thinking of how much is he going to charge me, because it's very insurance dependent and what diagnosis codes they are going to write, right? So these are all very vague numbers to build in your algorithm to match. So I was just wondering, how are you addressing those variables?
Sure. So I'll start with the point about sort of ratings and patient satisfaction. You can at least look in the claims data and see whether patients who see this provider initially tend to continue to see that provider over time, or sort of vote with their feet and opt for another provider, which can give you some ability to make an inference about whether patients seem to be sort of satisfied with this provider. I agree it's not as good as a Yelp review, but it certainly gives you more than nothing. I also totally agree that patients don't care in particular about the costs of care of their providers, but they probably care sort of how often those providers are referring and referring appropriately, as well as whether those providers are following quality of care guidelines that already exist. So we're using a lot of that information in addition to cost.
I'm going to move over to
Sorry.
this side just because we have a lot of people that are standing in line. Over
Hi,
here.
I'm Vineet. I'm a data scientist with Qventus. The question is for Dan. Did you try working with just the EMR data?
So the short answer is no, and we're working on it. But yeah, this is a natural next step, is to try to now see what you can do just with the EMR. And I would suspect this is as good as a guess as anyone else, but that they actually underperform claims because of the more partial coverage. If you have episodic care, that means that you move between providers, then we don't have a complete picture of your, for example, chronic conditions. If we just look at narrowly collected EMR data, and that could be a problem. But again, we didn't do it yet, so I can't say.
And just to follow up, have you seen this study by Google that just came out? It's scalable and accurate deep learning with the EHR, and they actually predicted just with the EMR records.
Yeah, so that's Raj Kumar and others.
Right.
We definitely saw this research, and so just to kind of say a few more words about it for those who are not familiar. This is the research that focuses on actually tokenizing EMR as a way to make them less messy and more easy to work with, instead of more laborious feature engineering. And the bottom line is that when you look at so we can't exactly compare because these are different data sets.
Right.
But we can see that for the same horizons, we had like similar performances. So if you look at the day of admission and compare the AUC estimates, they are fairly similar to ours. They did use deep learning, so
Right.
that was for us a hopeful sign that actually, the fact that we didn't exploit all the cutting-edge AI technology that I'm sure Google was exploiting didn't make a huge difference. So I think this is exactly the kind of space we're trying to open up in the discussion of exactly what models, what data would work. But certainly, I think we were led to believe by our results so far that you could do a lot with claims. Certainly, there's a lot you could do with EMR as well. They're just much less widely available.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go back over to this side.
Yeah, thank you. My question is actually possibly quite similar to Dan. I also found it quite surprising that EMR data did not add value in your models. So it did. My question was if it's the depth of the models, such as like more complex models, such as neural networks that were just mentioned, but also if this is the way you plan to go and to create features from EMR data that would allow you to build the accurate models? Or do you think that the signal is just not there in the first place?
So, yeah, I think these are open questions. I'm not sure I know the answer. We're excited to to keep looking at that. I would just say that talking to experts in deep learning, it does seem like the very structured aspects of the data, there are not so many advantages to using deep learning to use them. I think where they come to play is for imaging and text and stuff that's really highly unstructured. We haven't tried that, but this is an open question, and I think my prior has shifted, so my posterior has shifted from thinking it would be extremely helpful to now, being more skeptic, but I don't know. That's an open question.
Great. We'll go back over to this side.
Hello, my name is Peter Robinson from Enable Biosciences, and we're producing screening tools for autoimmune diabetes. My question is for Jill from Cullen. So the price of the test, I think, it was really inspiring. I feel not many companies really use that as a major value point for their product because that's a huge driver for accessibility. But my question is, from Cullen's perspective, what are the key drivers of cost for running the test? Is it actually the sequencing costs or just running the assay? Is it the counseling? Are they all equal contributors to the actual cost of you running it?
The sequencing technology and improvements in sequencing technology, the whole industry has kind of felt those. And I think when you sit down and you design a lab to do one thing only really well with a bunch of experienced engineers, you just fundamentally get a different economics out of it than if you just try, you're at some big academic lab and you're trying to launch a new sequencing assay. you're just not going to get the optimizations of the COG. So I mean, it really does go end to end. And even things like variant classification and genetic counseling, which are things that people would say, you know, how we need to figure out how we're going to scale those two things before this can ever be implemented in large populations. But if you sit down and you just, you know, take a Silicon Valley design-centric approach to a problem, and they just, you know, followed genetic counselors around all day in the clinic and watched what they do, and then they automated all the things that were just rote, that a machine could do. And so then the genetic counselors can just focus on talking and helping people understand the results. And same with variant classification. So there's been optimizations made all along the way.
Thank you.
Great. And we'll go back over here.
Hi, Julia Samard from Stanford. I had a quick question about baseline. So going back to Mark's first question about the diversity of the population, even if you expand throughout the U.S. and get, you know, more rural and urban areas and different types of people from all different strata, how are you accounting for the fact that there has to be some almost implicit selection bias by restricting to people who have to be healthy? And we know, right, that's the point.
It's actually, we're recruiting, the exclusion criteria are actually really minimal. We're recruiting those that are healthy, at risk for disease, and those that have disease. So we're actually have a really broad net that we're.
Okay, because when you were talking before, I thought you said they have to be healthy. So then.
Oh no! Sorry, I'm sorry. I may have said that. Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Great, thank you. Over here.
Hi, I've got two questions. First is for Joe. You're more or less, it sounds like, trying to build an OkCupid system for patients and the physicians, which requires kind of input from both sides of that question. So one of the problems with the opioid crisis in the United States is that we have enabled patients to say that satisfaction is a prime determinant in their care. And so then how do we prevent patient satisfaction becoming the overall driving model for healthcare, and at the same time engage physicians in that process so it's actually a bilateral relationship?
I think it's a really good question. So to speak to the first part, I think that we need to be really careful about measuring patient satisfaction based solely on what the patient says and not also factoring in the provider's behavior. I mean, you can certainly look at how frequently does a provider prescribe opiates and how frequently do they allow those opiate prescriptions to be renewed, and sort of factor that in as a negative that might, you know, override some patient satisfaction score. And then in terms of engaging providers, I mean, I think for starters, we're going to launch this tool to our health plan clients, and I think providers are going to start to learn that the volume of care that's being driven their way is being related to these performance measures, which I think will then really drive their involvement and their engagement and their incentives to provide high quality care and high value care.
Thank you. My second question is for Jill from Color. More or less, we worry about healthcare disparities along very racial and socioeconomic lines right now. You are contracting specifically with companies that are providing healthcare for their employees. When you have a company with access to genomic data, what sort of barriers are in place to prevent an out-well employer from using that genomic data to make ongoing employment decisions?
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's contractually not allowed. And in fact, the employers don't want to be anywhere near that data. So it really hasn't been a real-world issue for us at all. The only thing that we share back with the employers is de-identified aggregate data so that they can see the performance metrics of it, and they don't ask for or want anything else.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Over here.
Hi, Ivana Maric from Stanford. I have a question for Dan. So I've been working with both claims and with EMRs, so I find very interesting your talk. One thing that I wanted to ask you is how much missing data did you have in EMRs? Because that's one thing that we saw, because patients come.
That's a great question. Thank you.
So
basically, one thing you don't want to do with missing data in healthcare is treat them as missing at random. Because not having an important blood test or diagnostic blood test is a very good sign usually. So basically the approach we took, which is quite standard, is to code missing as a separate category, keep those, and this is just information I have on you, that you didn't do this test. I put it into the algorithm, and then it might say good things about your probability of having a certain outcome.
Just some question. So what percentage, like?
So roughly, I don't have all the thousands of things on top of my mind, but just to kind of give you some flavor of things. So for the 50 most common blood tests, over the period we looked at, we had something on the order of, I think, 2/3 had them, a third was missing.
Okay.
And again, this is informative, so we didn't just assume that it was at random. For some, of course, more rare things, there's a lot of missing, which, and again, conveys information. So then if you got the test or had the measurement, it's already predictive of some potentially adverse outcomes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
So seeing no more questions from the audience, and feel free to get up at any time. We've got another 10 minutes or so. I have a question that I'd actually like each of you to address. In fact, I have a couple. But the first one is, what at the present time is rate limiting to your work? I mean, where either technologically or economically or just in terms of human capital, where are the needs in your field that are basically holding back progress from the kind of work that you want to do? Is it a data need? Is it a computational need? Start with Manny.
Yeah, so for us, we're really interested in learning about the genetics of human diseases. If you take a population cohort like the UK Biobank and you ask the question, how many Crohn's disease patients are in the UK Biobank, it would be approximately 2,000 to 3,000. And if you ask the question about schizophrenia, that answer is about 200 to 300 patients. So in terms of study design, experimental design for addressing those questions, it's important to consider what are the ascertainment biases that are inherent in these data sets.
So would just to follow up on that, if you had, for example, genomic data from whole countries, for example, if we were able to parlay the Danish biobank into a sequence like Iceland has done, would that give you less of a sampling ascertainment problem and improve your ability to do the work?
That definitely would improve our ability to do work, yes.
Great. Jill?
My mind went two different directions. One was like more business and one was more science.
You could do both.
On the science side, I would say, we just need to, there's several ongoing large unselected population genomic screening studies going on, and the papers are coming out and they're useful and they're helpful, but that's kind of what we're missing to know which ones of these inherited conditions should be moved into that tier 1 bucket in addition to the 3 that are already over there. And then from a business point of view, I would say the long sales cycles that it takes working with health systems, that it's a lot of conversations and committee meetings to get going, although the interest is there from day one.
I'm not surprised.
So I would say a combination of human capital and data infrastructures in the following sense. So the way the infrastructures in the organization are built, and I think this is representative of big healthcare systems, is that you have dozens, even hundreds of systems collecting data, and then these data are pooled in one place. But when you actually come and do research with these, the unlocking of variables and data is a labor-intensive process. And so I think we were trying to move in the direction, and Stanford's own Nigam Shah was helping us with that, of reorganizing data in a way that would save the labor that is required to unlock it. But I think this is a really important sort of constraint to relax, because every study takes sometimes weeks of just data unlocking, understanding what's going on in the data, and better data architecture could speed up this process.
Great. Joe?
So I'll definitely second the point about the sales cycle. But even more than that, and adding to that, is the amount of time that it takes from sort of rolling out a service like the one I've been talking about to being able to actually observe whether that service worked. We're very excited to roll out the service in a bit of an experimental fashion, sort of applying it to some subset of the population, but not the rest, so that we can make a real comparison of sort of the causal impact that matching members to doctors in the ways that we recommend has on outcomes. But it's going to take at minimum a year after a rollout to be able to sort of really study the impacts of that, which I think slows us down in terms of the ability to sort of convince people that what we're doing is working and to spread it further.
Great.
So for the
Susie.
study, I think that retaining the participants, like any research study, is critical to really the success of getting this information in and making it useful in the future. So this whole idea of return of results is such an important engagement tool, but it's really, really complicated. And we're really excited to kind of pioneer the way to move this forward, but there's a lot of challenges in giving back this data. And so, looking at the ways to do that in the most responsible and ethical ways, I think is one of the biggest challenges, because I think it's important because it empowers people, because they find value, and then they'll stay engaged. But we have to make sure that we're doing it in a really well thought out and meaningful way.
Great. Well, thank you all. We've had some new questioners from the audience. Take it over here.
So one of the questions I have is that, sometimes the raw data delivery to participant has a limited value. What is most important is a clinical outcome or recommendation, especially in the countries, where the health experts are, are underserved. So what do you see in terms of expert automated system? Are there any specific diseases where we can get there earlier with automated recommendation in terms of healthcare, which will help to expand the expert expertise to a lot more underdeserved area?
Is there anyone in particular you want to?
Susie, perhaps.
I think that we're testing a lot of models about that right now, and this is still research data, so I think it's the research results and the analytics of that data that's going to help us to develop these meaningful ways to speak with consumers going forward about, or participants and patients going forward about how to use the data. It is difficult to put things in this lay language that's meaningful for them, so it's definitely a challenge. And I think we're just going to have to learn as we go and kind of see what methods are most impactful for people over time, because there's so many differences in what people can really, understand.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Bustamante.
So first of all, I want to thank you for an incredible session. I mean, everybody knows this is my favorite conference of the year. I feel like a kid at Christmas. So thank you for coming out to speak with us. Wearing my sort of hat as an academic, and going back to Mark's question about sort of the biggest limits and pain points, would you agree that training of graduate students and postdocs, do you have enough data scientists at your organization to do the things that you'd like to execute on? And in particular, as we think about a world where so much of the data is going to live outside of NIH-funded consortia or other things, how do we do a better job of both pushing innovation out from universities into what you guys are trying to do, and simply train enough people to work with you? And maybe given the opportunity that you've got here to talk to graduate students and postdocs, what one thing would you like to leave them with that you wish you'd known before you either went into industry or as you've done these sort of industry academic collaborations? Because I think each one of you talked about, in one degree or another, that issue. So.
Joe, you want to take a swing at that, since I know Nuna has scraped the surface very successfully in this institution?
Sure, yeah.
And what could we be doing, honestly?
I will definitely say that recruiting and retaining top talent is always a limiting factor, especially in the extremely competitive market for both data scientists and engineers in Silicon Valley. For me, one of the biggest things that I learned and sort of wish that I'd known in grad school in sort of transitioning to an industry job is how to write good code. I wrote code like that was spaghetti code, and that you would only have to run once and it would produce your table for your paper, and then you were good to go. In industry, especially when you're sort of building a data science product rather than using data science to improve an existing product, you really need to understand those engineering best practices and how to work collaboratively with engineers to build something that is reusable and modular and sustainable.
Great. Dan, do you want to take a crack at that?
Yeah, I would
you
say
guys have infinite access?
No, this is a real constraint. It's very hard to find people that know how to work with data. But I would just say that in Tel Aviv, in the economics department, we're transforming the curriculum so that all the statistics really from year one is all done in R with simulation. So you play and understand the statistics, not just a sort of theoretical construct, and just get, at the very end to do some projects with data. So hopefully, this would be changing. But definitely a constraint, and definitely something I, myself experienced both on the student side and as someone hiring talent side.
Okay. Jill?
Yeah, we need more engineers and data scientists. So color.com. Go apply. And then I assume that there might be some med students, residents, or medical fellows in the audience. And I think it's a really interesting time to be a physician. Silicon Valley is paying more and more attention to health-related problems, and they need, the med to go with the med tech. And I've just had, an amazing last 8 or 9 years out here, doing this full time, working with the tech entrepreneurs to try to identify tractable problems in healthcare and come up with a compliant way to resolve it. So I'd encourage people to think outside the box.
Great. So we have time for just one last question, hopefully a short one, since we're very short.
All right, Ramesh Raskar at MIT. This goes back to kind of the incentive and disparity aspect of it. So we seem to have 3 main models of that, kind of retrospective, or kind of verily model to pay it upfront, or just believe in people's willingness to participate. I was wondering if you have thoughts on kind of the health data economics. How are we going to kind of make this actually fully incentivized and let market forces and human behavior play a role into that?
Anyone want to take a crack at that very hard question? It's a very hard question, Ramesh. And I think that many of us, I'll try and answer it myself, which is to say that many of us in the academic sector are deeply engaged in both strategies to make it attractive to the people who collect and maintain that data in the public and private sector, and also incredibly attractive, per Carlos's comment, to users and to students, so that this becomes the regular enterprise of our organization. But the biggest problem, the biggest rate limiting step from our point of view, from a strictly research point of view, is the availability and diversity of data for reasons that are very complicated and involves privacy, security, economic issues, and a wide variety of practical issues that have yet to be solved. Thank you.